barriers, then it tears down at times. Art isn't necessarily the harbinger of world peace. It can be used to galvanize armies against one another. But having the means for observing the expressions of the other, linguistic, cultural, in the art forms that they produce, can be really valuable in kind of building that, building mutual understanding. After working in the, one of the things that we did in Croatia was running arts camps for kids, the son of a Serbian father and a Croat mother, whose Croat mother was killed by Serbian thugs who shot up their house at night, did drawings on a big sheet of paper, while a Croat kid whose grandmother's house had been shelled and caused injury to his grandmother, who was a Croat, but it was Serbs from across the river who did that. No, the other one was the Croat woman who was killed. It was Croat militias that attacked their house, not Serbs. I misspoke. It was Croat militias who attacked their house because their father was a Serb and they wanted them to run to the Serbian areas. So anyway, she was killed in front of their eyes, and this happened to this child's grandmother. And then the Muslim kids whose father was taken from the middle of the night by Croat militias, they were all doing their own drawings on a sheet of paper and quietly kind of engaging in it. And there was one moment where one of the kids just took off and couldn't handle it, and that was fine. But over time, all the different kids started understanding one another, and the people who were around were understanding that there was all kinds of shared pain there, and that it was beyond, they were all kids in a room, who didn't necessarily, the differences of the, ethnic peculiarities, whether they said Vlach or Zug, was irrelevant. Vlach is the word for train, and Zug is the word for train, but it's the same. When I was in Japan, one of the big projects I worked on was this thing called Picnic on the Ocean, where there was a Japanese artist who had met a Korean artist when doing an artist in residency in New York, and really wanted to do a project together of some kind. And they did this thing called a Picnic on the Ocean, which was to meet together in the middle of the ocean between the two countries in what is actually disputed territory, and to have a little picnic. And it was interesting in how just be completely honest about it, the Japanese artist had some perceptions about how Koreans' capacities. Japan had colonized Korea in the 20th century, 45 years of Japanese colonial rule in Korea. And there's, perceptions. And so he planned out the whole thing. And he explained to his Korean counterpart how he had integrated his potential ideas into his plan. And the Korean guy was a little taken aback. But, in his own way, he justified taking part in it in order to overcome his own barriers internally. And so he participated. But in the end, even though this beautiful, peace-propagating picnic on the ocean that we did, and it happened, and it was beautiful, actually re-emphasized the post-colonial divide. And in the appropriation of the Korean ideas in the process, the Japanese artists kind of re-emphasized their role as the colonizer and kind of gave the Korean the impression that the colonizer still thinks that he can rule over the colonized. And so their art kind of broke barriers. So, yeah, I would just say that in the process of making art and in kind of thinking about the cultural expressions of the site, and this is something like our second exhibition at the cafe was called The Shenanigans Don't Make Totem Poles Either, Public Art Memory. It dealt a lot with this type of question with regards to the public art initiative that's going on with the waterfront there, that kind of is extremely shipbuilder focused without realizing kind of the other dimensions. And it's like, well, what do we do with public art and memory, and how do we think about these questions when we are coming up with a public art plan for a space, and how do we go about constructing our own self-perception, and how complicated or simplistic should that be? Yeah, so that's something I should carry on.
So that leads into what I sort of thought you were going to lead into, which is perfect. And I'm going to kind of combine those two questions, because I think how do you suggest we consider the inclination of various publics when making decisions about public art is very connected to one of the other questions that we had as well, which is when we think about public art to be displayed in a public space, what are ways that we should be thinking differently than when we consider art to be hung on a wall or displayed in the foyer of a hotel? So are there different things that we can do to draw visitors to a location, but at the same time resonating with locals? And I sort of see those two as fairly connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are fairly connected. I think we all like. We always need to consider the audience. You always need to consider the audience. I don't think you should pander to them. First and foremost, because you'll bore them, and you'll bore others even more. If somebody really wants to see a ballet, and you just give them a ballet, great, fantastic. But if you can give them something more interesting, more amazing, like these kind of like energy, food integrated, like public participatory, productive, cultural enterprise, that, would go like, wow, okay, so they took that, $400,000 that they were going to dedicate to public art, Twisted Metal, and they decided to figure out a way to do something more interesting with it. Interesting, there's ways to kind of go about choosing public art, or going about producing public art, whatever that means, in ways that kind of that challenge us, and allow us to kind of discover new possibilities without necessarily having to give the expected.
So I'm hearing open your mind to the possibility that art is not just a sculpture or something you hang on the wall, but the possibility of integrating in a lot of areas that we would not ever traditionally consider.
Right. Well, I think when we think about art, we should think about like, how has humanity been culturally productive since like the beginning of time, right? And is it just the paintings on walls that shows that we're culturally productive? I think not. I think there's all kinds of ways that part of it is integrated with technology. And if you have like technological development that is for the interest of military, the interest of capitalism or whatever, yeah, that is kind of off to the side. And yes, it is an expression of culture and who we are. Like condo towers are an expression of our culture, but they're inconsiderate a lot of the time. Not always, but a lot of the time they're kind of inconsiderate. And I think the more thoughtful you become, the more contemplative you are, and the more you want to go like, hey, how is this an expression of me? How is this thing that we're building an expression of who we are, what we are? Yeah, so I think that is what's really important. And if we ask honest questions to ourselves about, well, how does this relate to how we relate to others? The whole building process could be essentially an artistic project. I'd like to kind of take the opportunity of this question to kind of think about. Do you guys know about? Does anybody know the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square in London? About 150 years ago, a plinth was erected, and upon that plinth, they were going to put a big horse and a general, all that wonderful stuff. Somehow that plan fell through, didn't work out. And they were trying to figure out for 150 years, literally 150 years, what to do with that particular plinth. Because it's a permanent sculpture site. They need to put some kind of public sculpture on top of it.
It's not going to take that long with Lot 5, is it?
No, I certainly hope not. But it has taken a very long time. Like it's already taken like 30 some years, right? 30, 40 years to figure out what to do with Lot 5. So they kind of, and then finally someone was like, why don't we do all kinds of different public art on there? Why don't we put something up for a year and take it down, put something else up? We do that. Why not? And so, that was a really nice thing that they finally figured out. Like, human technology was not available to figure out that, you don't need to just have consensus on one item for eternity. That there's ways to be fluid about this and to have different ways of coming to a decision on something.
And opening your mind.
And opening your mind. And for me, I insist that we infuse what we do with meaning. Just invest meaning into each step. And if that takes a lot longer, who cares? But as long as it's a productive and ongoing process, and that we're taking advantage of the fact of the site to engage in that. Did I answer the question?
Yeah.
There's a few questions.
Yeah. That was very good. Does anyone have any specific questions for Tyler before I have a question to ask all of them? No? Okay, so Emily, I'm going to start with you. So given what you've heard from the other panelists tonight, what opportunities do you see for combining your fields of expertise in the design of Lot 5?
Well, I think the opportunities are potentially endless, and really it comes down to getting all the people in the room that are the potential, if it's Capilano University or whoever else is potentially using this space, getting all of those people in a room and be like, well, let's put our dreaming hats on. What is possible, and what are the inputs and outputs of each building, and how much space do we have? Where's the sunlight? Where are the wind times? It's totally endless, and it's really just based on the willingness for people to collaborate and have ideas and not be afraid to share ideas, because by speaking them, they're somehow committing themselves to eternity, following through, which may not be possible. I could be rooftop greenhouses and a soul food style temporary movable farmscape, but I have no idea who else really all the other players are and what they're bringing to the table and what actually makes sense for that space. So I think just the energy and finding places to come together is great, and being open-minded about how food can be participating in a landscape that isn't traditional, yeah. Lots of
That's fabulous. Yeah, I think that sounds really great. So same question for you, Alex. Given what you've heard from the other panelists tonight, what opportunities do you see for combining your fields of expertise in the design of Lot 5?
I have a short-term memory, and I kind of keep hearing the last two things you said. if you can think of ways where you're not building for eternity, and if you flip it the other way, what a terrible thing to build the wrong thing.